The survival rate is acceptable by galactic standards, which means 17%. The hub fell silent except for the gentle hum of life support systems and the distant sound of someone's confidence deflating. 17% was the kind of statistic that looked impressive on recruitment posters, but considerably less appealing when applied to one's continued existence. HFY Commander Thrixal, whose name translated roughly to Sharp Deathbringer in the Old Tongue, gestured dismissively with one of his 6 arms. The primitive human lacks context. Apex Prime has claimed the finest warriors of 14 species. It is an honor to face death in such a glorious arena. It's also statistically stupid, Zara observed, earning a series of gasps that would have been impressive if they hadn't come from beings who considered mathematics a form of mystical art. But sure, let's go poke the murder planet with a stick. What could go wrong? The equipment distribution ceremony was a study in bureaucratic priorities and species-based prejudice. The HFY received plasma rifles that hummed with enough energy to level small buildings. The Quintar were issued adaptive armor that could interface with their bioelectrical systems, providing enhanced strength and environmental protection. The crystalline cadets got harmonic resonators that could shatter rock formations with a single focused tone. Zara received a standard-issue survival kit that looked like it had been assembled by someone who had heard about camping second-hand and found the concept deeply disturbing. "This is it?" she asked, hefting the pathetically lightweight pack. "Deathworlders require minimal technological assistance," explained Supply Officer Kenneth, his tone suggesting that this was established scientific fact rather than thinly veiled discrimination. "Your primitive instincts should suffice for basic survival." My primitive instincts are telling me that whoever designed this mission has never actually seen a death world. Nonsense. Apex Prime has been thoroughly studied by our xenobiology department. From a very safe orbit, the transport to Apex Prime was a marvel of engineering efficiency, designed to deliver cargo, which in this case included several dozen terrified cadets, to the planet's surface with minimal regard for passenger comfort or psychological well-being. The ship's AI provided helpful commentary during the descent, its cheerful voice describing the various ways previous expeditions had met their demise, with the enthusiasm of a tour guide discussing local architecture. On your left, you'll notice the Screaming Canyons, where the Talvarian expedition discovered that sound-based navigation was inadvisable. The echoes are still bouncing around down there, along with what's left of their auditory organs. Zara stared out the viewport at a landscape that looked like it had been designed by someone with a serious grudge against the concept of hospitable environments. Apex Prime wasn't just a death world, it was a death world that had studied the subject and earned an advanced degree in creative carnage. Below us now are the crystal forests, where the light itself has evolved predatory instincts. The bright death, as locals call it, can blind, burn, or drive you insane depending on the season and your species' particular photosensitive vulnerabilities. Commander Thrixal's exoskeleton rattled with what passed for nervous laughter among his people. "Surely the Academy wouldn't send us somewhere genuinely dangerous." "Right," Zara muttered, watching something with too many wings and an unhealthy interest in their ship circling in the distance. "Because bureaucrats are famous for their accurate threat assessments." The landing site was a clearing that had been chosen for its apparent safety and accessibility, 2 qualities that immediately made it the most suspicious location on a planet where evolution had long ago abandoned any pretense of fair play. The survey team had described it as pleasantly vacant of immediate hazards, which translated roughly to, "We didn't see anything trying to kill us in the 30 seconds we spent here before running away." As the cargo bay doors opened, the cadets got their first taste of Apex Prime's atmosphere, a mixture of oxygen, nitrogen, and what could only be described as aggressive optimism from various microbial life forms that viewed new arrivals as either dinner or real estate opportunities. "Form up," ordered Instructor Melvoth, his voice carrying across the clearing with the authority of someone who intended to be far away when the actual dying started. "You have 72 hours to reach the extraction point on the other side of the continent. Your mission parameters are simple: survive, adapt, and try not to become a cautionary tale for next year's class." The alien cadets immediately began deploying their sophisticated equipment with the efficiency of trained soldiers and the confidence of people who had never met a seeker system that actively resented their existence. Plasma rifles powered up with satisfying hums, armor systems integrated with biological interfaces, and scanning devices began painting the landscape with enough sensor data to choke a computer. Zara opened her survival kit and extracted a compass, a knife, and what appeared to be a water purification tablet that looked like it had been designed by someone who considered bacteria a personal suggestion, rather than a biological imperative. "That's your equipment?" asked Quintar Cadet Blorpit, whose name sounded like someone drowning in disappointment. "Pretty much. But how will you navigate the quantum maze territories? How will you defend against phase-shifted predators? How will you survive the psychic storms that can drive lesser species to madness?" Zara looked at her compass, which was pointing steadily north, with the determination of a device that had never heard of quantum mechanics and wasn't about to start now. "I'll figure it out." The first day proceeded according to the natural laws that govern survival scenarios in hostile environments. The prepared suffered, the over-prepared suffered more, and somewhere in the distance, something made hungry noises that suggested the food chain was about to get a practical demonstration. The Vexi team's plasma rifles, so impressive in the controlled environment of the Academy, began suffering from what the technical manuals delicately called environmental interference, but what anyone with a functional understanding of physics would recognize as, "This planet doesn't like energy weapons." Their sophisticated targeting systems couldn't lock onto creatures that existed in a quantum superposition between there and about to be behind you. The Quintar delegation discovered that their adaptive armor, while excellent at interfacing with their bioelectric systems, had not been designed for an environment where the local bacteria had evolved to view bioelectricity as a dinner invitation. Their enhanced strength was somewhat offset by the need to spend considerable time scraping aggressive microorganisms off their equipment. The crystalline cadets found that their harmonic resonators, capable of shattering rock formations, were considerably less effective against predators that had evolved in an environment where the rocks themselves occasionally got up and hunted in packs. Zara walked. She walked with the steady, unremarkable pace of someone who had grown up on a world where walking was less a means of transportation and more a continuous negotiation with an environment that viewed human existence as a fascinating experiment in persistence. She walked past crystal formations that sang hunting songs, through groves of trees that tracked movement with predatory patience, and around lakes that bubbled with what definitely wasn't natural volcanic activity. The alien cadets, struggling with their malfunctioning equipment and growing awareness that their technological superiority was more of a technological suggestion on Apex Prime, began to notice something peculiar about their human companion. The predators weren't attacking her. It started small. A pack of razor wolves that had been stalking the group, suddenly veering away when they caught Zara's scent. A crystal serpent that had been preparing to ambush the party from an overhead branch, simply, at a fleet capable hunters that had been circling overhead, began finding other, more pressing engagements whenever she looked up at them. "This is highly irregular," muttered Commander Thrixell, his exoskeleton clicking with agitation as another potential threat simply melted back into the undergrowth rather than press an attack. "The local fauna should be exhibiting standard predatory behavior patterns." "Maybe they're full," suggested Blurpith, though his tone suggested he didn't believe his own hypothesis. "Or maybe they're smart," Zara observed, stepping over what looked like a trap that had been carefully disguised as normal ground but fooled absolutely no one who had grown up dodging sidewalk cracks that could break more than your mother's back. By the second day, the pattern had become impossible to ignore. Apex Prime's legendary death dealers, the creatures that had turned the planet into a byword for hostile environments throughout the galaxy, were actively avoiding the human cadet. Not just avoiding, retreating. Backing away with the careful respect usually reserved for apex predators, by everything lower on the food chain. The breaking point came when they encountered their first genuine apex beast. The Void Stalker was everything the Academy's xenobiology texts had promised, and several things they had diplomatically omitted. Standing roughly 4 meters at the shoulder, with hide that seemed to absorb light and claws that could cut through molecular bonds, it was the kind of creature that evolution produced when it decided to stop pulling punches and start taking things personally. It emerged from a shadow that definitely hadn't been large enough to contain it, moving with the fluid certainty of something that had never met a challenge it couldn't solve through the application of creative violence. The alien cadets froze, their sophisticated training protocols engaging in a desperate search for procedures that might apply to facing down a creature that existed primarily to make other creatures stop existing. The Void Stalker looked at the group, cataloging threats with the professional interest of an apex predator assessing a buffet. Its attention passed over the Vexi with their malfunctioning plasma rifles, dismissed the Quintar in their compromised armor, and completely ignored the crystalline cadets, who were attempting to coordinate a harmonic attack that would probably have been impressive if their equipment hadn't started developing what could only be called performance anxiety. Then it looked at Zara. For a moment that stretched like taffy in a temporal distortion field, predator and human regarded each other across the fundamental divide that separated hunter from prey. The Void Stalker's sensor arrays, evolved over millions of years to catalog every form of threat in its environment, provided their assessment. The creature took a step backward, and then another. Then it turned and disappeared into the undergrowth, with the hasty dignity of something that had suddenly remembered an urgent appointment elsewhere. "Did that thing just," Commander Thrixell began, "run away?" Zara finished. "Yeah, it did, but that's impossible. Void Stalkers are apex predators. They don't retreat from anything. They do from me." The silence that followed was filled with the sound of several worldviews undergoing rapid and uncomfortable reconstruction. The alien cadets stared at their human companion, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time since the mission began. "What are you?" whispered Blorpith. Zara considered the question with the thoughtful expression of someone who had been asked to explain something so fundamental that she had never really thought about it consciously. "I'm human," she said finally. "From Earth." "Yes, but what does that mean?" And here, in the middle of a death world that had just demonstrated its complete unwillingness to challenge a single human cadet, Zara began to explain something that the galaxy's xenobiologists had somehow managed to miss in all their careful cataloging and classification. "Earth isn't just a death world," she said, stepping over a carnivorous plant that hastily retracted its tendrils rather than risk contact. "It's the death world, the original, the template that every other hostile environment in the galaxy is a pale imitation of." She gestured at the landscape around them, where Apex Prime's legendary dangers were maintaining a respectful distance. "This place? The Void Stalkers, the Crystal Serpents, the Razor Wolves, they're what happens when evolution gets creative with hostility. Earth is what happens when evolution gets serious about it." The alien cadets followed her explanation with the growing horror of beings who were beginning to understand that their entire conception of universal threat hierarchies had been fundamentally flawed. "Earth spent 4 billion years perfecting the art of trying to kill everything that lived on it," Zara continued, her tone conversational, as they walked past a grove of trees that were definitely pretending to be normal trees and doing a poor job of it. Ice ages, meteor impacts, supervolcanoes, mass extinctions, the planet kept trying new ways to wipe the slate clean and start over, and every time, life found a way to survive, adapt, and get tougher. She paused to examine a flower that was clearly some form of elaborate trap, nodding approvingly at its construction before continuing on. "Humans are what happened when that 4 billion-year arms race produced something that could think. We're not just survivors. We're the end result of the most comprehensive survival training program in the galaxy's history. Every other predator on Earth was just preparing us for everything else." Commander Thrixell's exoskeleton was rattling with what could have been fear or awe, or possibly both. But the Academy classified humans as primitive, technologically inferior, a minor species from a backwater world. "We are technologically inferior," Zara agreed cheerfully. "Our equipment is basic, our weapons are crude, and our understanding of advanced physics is pretty much limited to push-button make go. But we're also the species that survived Earth." As if to emphasize her point, another apex predator, this one a phase-shifted hunter that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, materialized briefly in their path, took one look at Zara, and decided that its current dimension was suddenly less appealing than several others. "The thing about surviving on a death world," Zara continued, stepping through the space where the hunter had been, with the casual confidence of someone who had never doubted she belonged at the top of any food chain, "is that it teaches you to recognize threats, real threats, and it teaches everything else to recognize you." The third day of their survival test proceeded with the surreal quality of a nature documentary, where all the predators had developed stage fright. Apex Prime's legendary death dealers continued their policy of strategic avoidance. Whenever the human cadet appeared, leading to scenes that would have been comical if they hadn't been so fundamentally disturbing to the alien cadets' understanding of how ecosystems were supposed to function. The extraction point, when they finally reached it, was guarded by a pack of crystal drakes, territorial hunters that the Academy's survival guides described as implacably hostile to all forms of organic life. The guides had apparently never considered the possibility that organic life might include something the drakes found more implacable than themselves. The drakes took one collective look at Zara and decided that their territory was actually much larger than they had previously thought, extending in all directions away from wherever the human happened to be standing. The extraction team's shuttle arrived to find 6 alien cadets in various states of technological failure and psychological distress, accompanied by one human who appeared to have treated the survival test as a pleasant nature walk through someone else's moderately dangerous neighborhood. "Mission report," requested Extraction Commander Veltos, a being whose species had evolved past the need for facial expressions, but somehow managed to convey deep confusion anyway. "Apex Prime's ecosystem appears to have developed an unexpected preference hierarchy," reported Commander Thrixal, his voice carrying the hollow tone of someone whose worldview had been fed through a particle accelerator and emerged as something completely different. "Local apex predators demonstrate consistent avoidance behaviors when exposed to human presence. The Deathworld showed submission displays to the cadet from the Deathworld," added Blurpith, his amphibious skin cycling through colors that translated roughly to existential crisis. Commander Veltooth's lack of facial features somehow managed to convey the expression of someone trying to process information that didn't fit any existing categories. "Clarify, the planet considered the human cadet a greater threat than its own apex predators?" "The planet considered the human cadet an apex predator," corrected one of the crystalline cadets, her harmonic frequencies modulated by what could only be described as professional respect. "We weren't on a survival mission. We were accompanying a inspection tour by something higher up the food chain than anything Apex Prime had to offer." The return to the Academy generated the kind of bureaucratic chaos usually reserved for diplomatic incidents or accounting errors of galactic significance. Emergency committees were formed, threat assessments were revised, and several xenobiology textbooks were quietly recalled and fed into recycling units, while their authors tried to explain how they had managed to classify the galaxy's premier apex predator species as primitive bipeds with anger management issues. Zara found herself the subject of intensive study by beings who approached her with the careful respect usually reserved for unexploded ordnance or visiting dignitaries from civilizations capable of stellar engineering. Her casual responses to their questions, delivered with the same conversational tone she had used to explain Earth's evolutionary history, sent ripples of adjustment through academic departments across the galaxy. "So, when your species encounters a new environment," asked Dr. Felmuth, the Academy's chief xenobiologist, "your response is to immediately begin adapting it to your needs?" "Pretty much," Zara confirmed. "If we can't adapt to it, we adapt it to us. If we can't adapt it to us, we find a way to survive in it anyway, until we figure out how to adapt it to us." "And this is standard behavior for your species?" "Well, yeah. It's what we do. We're very persistent." The word persistent entered galactic diplomatic vocabulary as a euphemism for terrifically unstoppable within 6 standard months. The reclassification process took considerably longer, requiring updates to threat assessment databases, diplomatic protocols, and several textbooks on interspecies relations. Earth was quietly moved from the minor backwater worlds category to a new classification that translators struggled to render in most galactic languages, but which roughly meant place where the monsters come from. Humans were reclassified from primitive bipeds to Deathworld apex predators, with technological aspirations and concerning social tendencies. The reclassification included a note that human cadets should be considered equivalent to fully trained elite warriors from most other species, and that their casual attitude toward danger should not be mistaken for incompetence, but rather for the confidence of beings who had evolved in an environment where everything else was more afraid of them than they were of it. Zara graduated from the Academy with honors, a commendation for interspecies cooperation, and a notation in her file that she had completed the Apex Prime survival test with such efficiency that local fauna began exhibiting submission behaviors typically reserved for interactions with superior apex predators. She also received a request from the Academy's xenobiology department, asking if she would consider participating in their research on human predatory presence and its effects on hostile ecosystem dynamics. She declined, mentioning that she had been accepted into Earth's colonial marine program and would be spending the next few years helping establish human settlements on worlds that the galaxy had classified as uninhabitable Deathworlds, but which Earth's colonial assessment teams had rated as challenging but manageable, with proper equipment and a reasonable attitude toward environmental hostility. The irony was not lost on the galaxy's academic community that the species they had dismissed as primitive backworlders were volunteering to colonize the places that everyone else considered too dangerous for scientific expeditions, much less permanent settlement. It was, however, lost on the humans, who approached the colonization of Deathworlds with the same casual competence they brought to most challenges, a willingness to adapt, an inability to recognize when they were supposed to give up, and an evolutionary heritage that had prepared them for environments that made other species question the fundamental fairness of the universe. As Zara boarded the transport that would take her to her next assignment, establishing a research station on a world where the weather patterns included localized gravity storms and the indigenous life forms had evolved past the need for matter to exist in only one dimension at a time, she reflected on her time at the academy with the fond nostalgia of someone remembering a particularly educational camping trip. The galaxy, meanwhile, quietly began updating its maps to include a new notation for systems containing human colonies. Approach with caution. Indigenous apex predators have established territorial claims and demonstrate concerning levels of environmental adaptation. And somewhere in the academic halls of the Terran Military Academy, where the interspecies exchange program continued to foster understanding between civilized races and the newcomers from that quaint little backwater called Earth, instructors began their lectures with a new opening line. Today, class, we will discuss the concept of apex predation and why the primitive human in the back row is smiling. The Terran Military Academy's interspecies exchange program was, by all accounts, a diplomatic masterstroke wrapped in bureaucratic incompetence and seasoned with a healthy dose of species-based condescension. Established in 2387 after the Third Galactic Accords, it was designed to foster understanding between the civilized races of the galaxy and the newcomers from that quaint little backwater called Earth. The program's success rate was measured not in survival statistics, though those were tellingly sparse, but in the number of forms filed in triplicate and the impressive holographic certificates awarded to participating institutions. Zara Blackwood stood in the Academy's central hub, watching alien cadets cluster in their species-specific groups with the casual interest of someone observing a particularly slow-moving traffic accident. The Vexi clicked and chittered in their corner, their crystalline exoskeletons catching the artificial sunlight in ways that would have been beautiful if not for their habit of discussing the nutritional value of everything that moved. The Quintar delegation huddled near the moisture dispensers, their amphibious skin glistening with what the Academy politely called essential atmospheric adaptation, but what everyone else recognized as nervous sweating. "Ah, the human specimen arrives," announced Instructor Melvoth, a crystalline being whose voice carried the particular tone reserved for addressing exotic pets or potentially dangerous machinery. "Class, observe the primitive biped from Terra 3. Note the inefficient calcium-based skeletal structure and the wasteful dual respiratory system." Zara raised an eyebrow, a gesture that sent several cadets scrambling for their translation devices. "Good morning to you too, Professor. Should I fetch my leash, or are we jumping straight to the dissection?" The instructor's crystalline facets shifted through several colors that roughly translated to confused indignation. Such insolence from a Deathworlder was unprecedented, though admittedly refreshing in its directness. Most species spent their first week prostrating themselves before the Academy's intellectual superiority. "Today," Melvoth continued, regaining his composure with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to educational humiliation, "we announce the final crucible. Your survival examination will take place on Apex Prime, a Class VI Deathworld, where only the most evolved species have successfully—" "How many teams have actually survived?" Zara interrupted, her question cutting through the instructor's prepared speech like a plasma cutter through diplomatic protocol. The pause that followed was filled with the sound of nervous chittering and the subtle whir of translation matrices working overtime. Melvoth's facets cycled through what could charitably be called embarrassment.